with our experiences teaching students and training teachers online, the good things and the bad things. And out of that emerged a project that we started working on together where we were exploring the whole concept of interaction. So what we'd like to do in this talk together with you, this is a bit of theory, but then practical ideas of things that we've been experimenting with students in an online environment. And it all starts with the word interaction. Interaction and its various forms, interact, interactive, interactivity, are kind of very buzzwordy now, okay? And they're often, now especially, associated with education technology. But I don't think that's always been the case. In fact, if we look at definitions, here I've taken these definitions from the Cambridge Online Dictionary, we see there are three kinds of definitions here of interact and interactive. But you can more or less divide them into two ways of looking at that. One is the idea that interacting or interactive is people talking or communicating ideas to each other. And the other is interactive as a person doing something with a piece of technology, a piece of software, or a machine. And I think this is particularly interesting to us as language teachers because as language teachers, historically, we've been more interested in the human-to-human type interaction in our classes. But if we look now at what is the most prominent use of that word, interaction, I think it's more human-to-machine interaction. In fact, if you were to do a Google image search, and I did one just a little while ago, where I typed in the word interactive, what do you think the kind of images would be there? People talking together or fingers and machines? It was all 2 pages of fingers and machines until I got a finger touching a screen or a computer with like pictures and things coming out or someone in front of a computer. Not many, if any, people talking to people. So we were talking a little bit about this, partly because we've been asked to make our courses more interactive. Jill and I had been each working on our own in different teacher training programs, and we had been given a Moodle. Hands up, how many people have a Moodle here, have used a Moodle? Yes, most of you. And we were asked to make more interactive activities. But this meant making those kind of quizzes on a Moodle, which were going to be the student then interacting with a piece of software with no teacher involvement at all. And that was the idea of what interactive meant. We started reading around a little bit on this, like when did interactive for teaching become more about interacting with the machine rather than interacting with people? There was a very interesting article we found by 2 Norwegian scholars, who I'm going to read their names out here, Nortville and Haugsbach, in the mid-90s, did a study of the rise of the word interactive as used as a marketing term in education. This, if you remember, would have been coinciding with the time of the interactive whiteboard. Remember when that came out and it was the big boom, and at conferences there was an interactive whiteboard that would revolutionize teaching. I thought it'd be interesting to cover some of the points they make because I think they're valid to our work today. In the marketing of interaction, in the 90s especially, but into the 2000s, the idea became implanted, the word interactive became sort of a magical word. Anything was good if you could say it was interactive. So if you had a book with interactive activities, with a CD-ROM that had interactive activities, this course is good because it's interactive for the students. This whiteboard is perfect, it's interactive. Interactive became very quickly human-to-machine communication. At the same time, the idea became that learning was more important than teaching, and that interaction with software was a new way of learning. This then placed conveniently education technology as modern, as opposed to face-to-face teaching, which was old. I want to read you a quote from the Haugsbach and Nortville thing, which I thought was quite interesting about this. The concepts of teaching and learning were introduced as a dichotomy, to a large extent based on quite simple stereotypes of the two phenomena. Teaching was something old and bad that we had to minimize, and learning was something new and good that we had to rise up. So if you see TED Talks during this time and other talks about interactive and teaching and how teaching is being changed, things like a teacher lecture, like what I'm doing now, was considered bad. But learners interacting was considered good. The curious thing is that some of these interactions tended to be videos of teachers giving lectures, which were some way better than the real person. And I'm sure you've all seen this. So like, this is an interactive thing. You watch a teacher giving a lecture. The TED Talks, in fact, are excellent examples of teacher lectures, and they're considered very innovative. So, we wanted to reclaim in our work the idea of interaction being human to human. And so we drew a distinction between what we considered weak interaction, which was interaction with a machine, which can be very motivating, but maybe not sustainable over a very long period of time, and strong interaction, which was between people. Interestingly here, we are not saying that technology doesn't have a role to play in this. If social media has taught us one thing, is that people very much enjoy using technology to interact strongly with each other. Okay? The rise of social media isn't people chatting with a Facebook bot. It's people talking to each other via the technology. So this is not an anti-technology argument. It's about reclaiming the stuff that people like to do with technology, which is talk with each other. And the tools that we were looking at that facilitate interaction for students and teachers, we found were often underused. And the two tools that we looked at especially were discussion forums, which have been around since the beginning of the internet and are still popular, and chats. And in chats, I would now include things like WhatsApp messaging and Facebook messaging. Both of these tools have stood the test of time. They are still what most of us are interacting with each other via. So we wanted to look at those. We could also look at Skype and video interaction and audio interaction, but we wanted to start at a baseline that was easy and accessible for everybody, regardless of your internet speed. The saddest thing that I remember seeing was that a discussion forum in a language course, so you'd have your online part of, you're teaching a blended course, and there was a discussion forum there. And I'd be asking teachers, what do you have in your discussion forum? And basically, it was things like an announcement. Remember to hand in your papers by Wednesday. Please register by Friday. And you had this amazing potential where people could communicate with each other and just nothing was happening. It was just as a repository for documents, files, and announcements, one way from the teacher to the students. So, we started designing interactive tasks. Here's where Jill comes in.
And perhaps we should also say that we've designed the interactive tasks using platforms like Facebook or Moodle or WhatsApp, where people are typing and writing. But it's also possible to do it with speaking through perhaps Skype or other video conferencing applications. But we decided, from the point of view of teachers using it, we'd start at the easiest way to use it, and people can always adapt it to a different medium. Okay, so I'll begin with 5 principles for designing interactive tasks. The first, as we've said at the beginning, was our interactive tasks are between human and human, not human and machine. The task should have a reason for communication, for example, to share information or give your opinions on something or share your values. They should have a purpose and a closure in an end point. That means the communication should achieve something, like solving a puzzle or creating a text or an artifact. I think this is very important, especially in online tasks, partly so that the activity has a built-in closure point, an end point. Otherwise it can go on, if it's open-ended, it can go on forever and it's difficult to bring it to a close. But also I think the fact of closure and having achieved something gives a very deep psychological satisfaction. You feel you've done something with language and you've reached an end point. It should involve two-way participation. The members of the group should both take account of others' contributions and contribute themselves. And finally, they should include a range of interaction and task types. So now I'll go on to talk about the task types and then come on to talk about the range of interaction patterns that we use. We classified activities into 5 types. Factual, this involves finding and sharing information on a factual topic. Personal, as in Facebook, exchanging personal information or anecdotes. Fanciful involves entering into an imaginary situation, perhaps a role play, and interacting to solve a puzzle or share information. Critical involves a range of opinions, argument, logical, rational argument. And creative, these activities involve interacting to create a communal poem, story, or another product. So we thought those 5 types appeal to different cognitive processes and also provided a range of tasks according to student preference. Some students, for example, might like logical argument and dislike role play and fanciful activities. Some students might prefer creative tasks. So I'll come on now to sample tasks and interaction. And I'll look at factual interaction first and give you 2 examples. So here's a very simple activity called Where in the World Am I? So it begins with a stimulus or a challenge. The teacher posts a picture of somewhere in the world and says, imagine I took this photo, where am I? You have to guess, and you have a maximum of 25 questions to guess. And note that examples are given. For example, you can't say, are you in Europe or Africa? But you can say, are you in Europe? Because you can answer yes or no. So it's important to give examples for the students so that they know what kind of language to use. And at the bottom, there's also examples of kinds of questions they could use. So the game goes on until the students guess where it is, or they narrow the location down.
And it's not mentioned here, but when they guess, the person who guesses then posts a picture themselves, and everyone continues asking that person, and then the next person who guesses. So we would run this for maybe 2 weeks on a WhatsApp group or a Facebook Messenger. Sorry.
And the picture is actually where Lindsay lives in Spain, in case you were wondering, to save you asking the questions. Okay, here's another interactive activity on the same sort of pattern, but it's a bit more complicated. The last one was a very simple pattern. So this one involves private messaging, either by something like private message on Facebook or by email. You give each person a sport, for example, baseball or tennis. Everybody gets a different sport. And their task is they have to write 3 rules for the sport without saying what it is. And they write it in one forum post. Also the instruction, remember the language we studied for football rules to help you. That's just an example of the students having had a previous lesson, either face-to-face or online, where they learnt language for giving rules. And this is an activity to practice it. The other thing that's interesting to note is the deadlines. Post your rules by 16th of July. Deadlines are very important in keeping the students on task and not letting the activity meander on for too long. So from task 1, it goes on to task 2, interaction. They all read each other's rules and try to guess the sport. You have to choose 2 different posts and guess the sport. Note that you stipulate the number of posts that they have to look on. This is to give everybody 2 posts to look at and prevent one student from guessing everybody's posts and monopolising the activity, but also making students aware that they have to post on 2 other people's posts. And again, there's a deadline. Task 3 goes on to creation. Now you're going to create a new sport. Choose 4 rules from 4 different sports and create a new sport. And finally, they interact again, looking at these sports and choosing ones which they would like to play. So these 2 activities are examples of an interaction pattern we called Confetti. It begins with a stimulus or a challenge, like the bride and groom come out of the church and everybody hurls answers like confetti. So the first one we looked at was very simple. It was a stimulus and then lots of confetti from the students in the form of questions. The variation, sports shorts, is a more complicated pattern. The teacher posts a stimulus, the students reply, the students read and interact about each other's posts, and then they create a post themselves, and in fact interact again, saying what they'd like. Okay, I'll hand back to Lindsay now for personal interaction.
Incidentally, one of the things I noticed when training teachers and looking at what they were doing online is that initial confetti interaction tended to be the only pattern people would use. So the default pattern for discussion tasks would be read this and post your answer by Friday, or post a reply, which didn't really encourage interaction. So students would read, and maybe on Thursday night at midnight, they would post their reply quickly to have it there. If you stage the tasks, you give different deadlines, then you have better chances of getting interaction. Let's look at personal interaction. I imagine some of you in this room have a friend on social media who posts photos of food that they are going to eat. Is that true? Hands up if you know that person. Hands up if you are that person. No, I won't make you say that. However, it is a thing, right? It's a thing that people do. They seem to like it. So we thought, let's use that as an activity idea. So here, again, I'm now showing you how we would stage it out. So first, the teacher begins. I post a photo of a food that I had or I like. And now everyone asks me a question. This is in a forum. So a Moodle forum or a discussion forum or a Facebook group forum. I answer all the questions. And they have until Monday or whatever. I also specify you can't repeat a question, so you've got to at least read what other people have said. Okay? Once they've all asked their questions that I've answered, now the next part of the task begins. So the next instructions come up on the forum. I say, good, here are all the questions you asked me. I corrected them. So I made minor corrections, so they're all good English questions now. And for the rest of the task, each of you posts a photo of food in the forum, etc., something you like, age, drink, whatever. It doesn't matter as long as it's food or drink. When you've posted a photo, look at the other photos, ask at least 3 other people. Notice here, again, the force, the stipulation, we want you to do at least 3 other people. Use the questions, here's the support that I have given based on their language, the questions that at the top here to help you. And if someone asks you a question about your photo, answer. You have until Friday. Good luck. And then they should start interacting with each other. Here's another one. This or that. This is a forum game that I played with friends of mine, not ELT related, but it works well in ELT. So for example, cats or dogs? Cats? How many are cat people here? Cats? Dogs? Okay. So you need to get lists of different things. Cats or dogs? Coke or Pepsi? PC or Mac? Samsung or Apple, okay? So you then, the teacher starts off by writing the 2 things. And then the students, this is for like low levels. I did this with A1. And we had taught expressions like I prefer, I like, or I really like. So I wrote traveling by bus or traveling by train. And then people had to answer, very short answers. Once they all had the idea, I said, now we begin the interaction, okay? Of course, you can write neither if you don't like either. And now the interaction changes. The first person, I nominate someone, they have to think of 2 things and write them. Apple or Samsung. And then the person underneath that writes their answer and then writes 2 things. The person underneath that writes their answer and then writes 2 things. The person underneath that writes their answer and writes 2 things, okay? So you get a thread developing. And this kind of pattern is like a chain or a pass the parcel. This works very well in a medium like WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, where you only have to read the thing above, and then you post the next thing, and the person reads that, and then you just keep going down. So student 1 replies and posts next stimulus, student 2 replies and posts next stimulus, so on and so forth, until the end of the week where you finish the activity, and you can do review of the language you've done there. Am I on this one as well? Okay. Let's look at fanciful interaction. We're doing okay here. I have to go quickly to get as many activities in as possible. This one here was another game that I played with some friends in a gaming community that I'm a part of, which was called Almost Superpower. This is a lot of fun. We had done, with my students, we did modals, and the teacher begins, you post, again, it is similar to this or that in the interaction. I post, for example, you think of a superpower that you would like to have, beginning with I can. So I would post, I can fly. The next person has to make a condition to the superpower. They need to post under it, beginning with but, or but unfortunately you, and then make it less powerful. So for example, Jill, I say, I can fly, and then Jill posts,
but you can only fly 1 meter off the ground.
And now Jill says,
I can read people's thoughts.
but they come out in a different language that you can't decipher, or something like that. So what happens is everybody, and then there's just a free fall. People are always posting conditions and then their new superpower and so on. They keep going down.
Try to do better.
Okay, yeah. So.
Okay, so that was in the same Pass the Parcel format that we already introduced. And here's one in a more complicated format. This is a murder mystery. First of all, you have to private message the students, again by Facebook private message or by email, and you send each student a numbered clue. Like clue number 1 goes to student A, clue number 2 goes to student B, by private message, so nobody else can see it. Then you post on the forum a scenario of the murder, saying what happened at what time, etc. The students read this and then they begin to interact. Student 1 posts clue 1. So student with clue number 1 should begin. Post the clue, and then everybody can write deductions and suggestions. It's language of deduction or past modals. Must have, might have, should have, may have. So for example, clue 1, the window was open. The students could possibly post the murderer might have got in through the window, or he might have come in through the door and left by the window. I thought you'd like to see an actual example from a trial that we did. A teacher in Auckland in New Zealand trialed some activities for us. And this is what the students wrote. Clue 1, there were no fingerprints on the knife. So the other students then reply with their suggestions. Oh, then the murderer might have worn gloves. Or maybe the murderer was an alien who doesn't have fingerprints. Okay, so interaction pattern 3 we called poker. The students take numbered turns to post a stimulus and the others react, a bit like a poker game when you lay your card on the table and then everybody reacts. Okay, I'll pass back to Lindsay to do critical interaction.
So critical interaction is a bit like the factual interaction, but here we're asking more for opinions. Okay, so this one is based on a speaking activity which people have done in class, yes, but. In this case, you give them a series of readings about climate change, we chose as this one. And so they had to find the possible solutions to climate change. Okay, so that's the reading that they were given. And then we divided them into 2 groups. One was the advantages group, and the other was the disadvantages group. If I had a blended class and this was face-to-face, I would divide them into groups face-to-face. If not, I would assign them their groups and give each group its own private forum or area, chat space group, whatever, to discuss. Then the interaction begins. First, in their groups, they need to share their arguments that they have read, okay, and think of the advantages and disadvantages. So they need to kind of do a bit of brainstorming. I'm looking in on the forum, making sure that they're doing this, give them a deadline, and then the next part of the interaction begins. They are put into pairs, one advantage and one disadvantage, so an A and a B. And then they are given either by email or then it's supposed to do by private message to put a recommendation for a solution. One person begins. To stop climate change, we should. And student B replies, beginning yes, but, and stating a disadvantage. And then A replies again saying yes, but, and then puts another advantage. And B, yes, but, and so on. And they keep going like that until whoever runs out first. Okay, so that's another one. This is slightly more complicated to manage because now they will be communicating privately. You can put them in a forum where you can monitor that as well. This one is using breakout rooms. So if you teach in Moodle, you can set up breakout rooms, or you can set up like private email kind of things where they email to each other. So they do things in groups and then they regroup together, like the traditional speaking jigsaw type thing.
Lindsay.
Yep.
I just a bit of feedback from one of the teachers who trialled materials for us. Said she had the students in a computer lab private messaging each other in an activity that was similar to that. And she said it was quite frustrating for her because they were private messaging each other and laughing, but she wasn't in on the joke. So we amended the activities to suggest that you include yourself in each private message that you set up for the students when they're working in pairs. Okay.
We're moving up on complexity. So you've seen from the easy activities like where in the world am I? Now we're getting to ones which will produce more language. Here's one that I did with a group of Spanish students. In class, we said we were talking about constitutions and history and things like that. And I said, we're going to do an activity where we're going to create a constitution for an imaginary country. Let's give our country a name, so we suggested the name. I said, we'll do this online. You need to check in the form regularly. And what you need to do is post a rule or a law for our country's name. For example, it is illegal to keep dogs, or you mustn't, we won't have any cars. I don't know, laws. And so they had to post these, again, an initial deadline, by Friday, post 3 laws. Then on Friday, the interaction begins. They have to vote on laws to pass them into the Constitution. That means that they start asking each other, trying to canvass votes. If a law gets 3 votes, it's passed and becomes part of the country's constitution. As the teacher, I am monitoring. When I see that a law gets 3 votes, I post up saying, this law is now part of our constitution. When another law gets 3 votes, I say, these 2 laws are part of our constitution. Where it becomes interesting is that they can also pass laws to undo other laws. So you get all the kind of politicking going on, saying, I'll help you pass this law. If we can pass this law, I'll vote for yours if you vote for mine. And then someone like unvotes and says, no, I'm not going to vote for that law, or let's vote to get rid of this law. In the end, you'll get like maybe 3 laws, because that's just the way it goes. But they did a lot of interacting, and I gave them 2 weeks. I said, you have 2 weeks to come up with laws that we all agree on for our Constitution. And then we kind of did the correction at the end and presented it in class. This here was a pattern we call Postal ballot, where students post, they read and vote on things, and they discuss and reach a consensus. Okay, so that was a different kind of pattern. Last one, creative.
Okay, so we'll look at the final one, which is where students either individually or in collaboration write a story, a poem, or create an advert or another kind of artifact. Okay? This is called Number Plate Story. And when we first moved to New Zealand, and indeed I still am very interested in people's number plates, because you can have a great deal of latitude in New Zealand. You can have all letters, or a combination of letters and numbers. You have to have 6, that's all. 5 or 6, actually. I think it's 5 or 6. So I always wondered, I'm sitting in a kind of queue at the traffic lights, and I see a car plate like this, not old. And I just want to know the story behind that. For example, how old do you think that person was? Do you think they're old or young? Old, yes, that's what I thought too. So this activity begins with a selection of number plates. These are all real ones that I've seen on the road. So the following are real number plates. What do you think they mean? Just take a moment and think about them. I did it is easy. Not old is easy. Why be slow? Baby, I owe you too. Now, there's a real story behind that one. Was his. Determined, I miss you, and out of work. Okay? So task 2 would be the students try and guess what they mean. So task 2 would be the teacher helping them and saying, giving the answers. Okay? Task 3 is creation. First of all, the students read a story about a number plate. And the one we chose in the book was a number plate that said 1 extreme. And the story we invented was that there was a street musician, a busker called Mario, who was very, very poor, but eventually got talent spotted and now is a famous opera singer. And he has the number plate 1 extreme to remind himself that he's gone from one extreme to another. Okay? So the students choose the number plate they think is interesting, and what do they think is the story behind the number plate? They then have to read their classmates' stories, choose one and post an alternative explanation for that number plate. And I thought again you'd like to see a real student contribution. So this was, when he chose was his. When he was young, Jack met a materialist girl named Maria. Despite all his true love, he did not have enough money to satisfy her. Then the cold-hearted girl left him to live a happy life with a richer man, breaking the heart of the poor young Jack. Emotionally perturbed, don't you love that, by this breakup, Jack became obsessed by money and his revenge, so he worked very hard to earn as much money as possible in order to ruin Maria's husband and buy all her belongings. Currently, Jack is laughing diabolically while driving a big black Maserati decorated by a vanity plate where we can read, "was his." So that's an example of the richness of student language that can be produced. We've gone from the very simple activity, where am I, to something like this. And so there's a whole range of tasks and interaction patterns. So that interaction pattern we called simply writer's group. Students create a story, poem, advert, and students read, react, and comment. Okay, I'll hand over to Lindsay to close.
I think that student was preparing his proficiency exam in vocabulary. Anyway, we come to the end of the talk. This project led to us writing lots of activities which we were very happy to be able to turn into a book, which is one of the reasons we're talking to you about today. So here's the advertisement, which we're very happy to do because we're very proud of it. This is a book we wrote called Interaction Online, which is hot off the press, and you can see a copy of the Cambridge stand. It's got more than 75 activities like this to be used primarily in discussion forums or chats. These can be adapted for webinars or for Skype calls. We know people who've adapted them for voice things. Most of the activities are text-based. We include all the instructions that you could just, and I think there's even an online resource you can just copy-paste the instructions so you don't have to rewrite the instructions yourself.
There's a source code.
Our images are all from either Creative Commons, I wanted to mention the sources here of the images, Creative Commons, or a website that I like to use called Pixabay, which gives you free images that you don't have to worry that you're pirating them offline. You can visit the Cambridge stand to find out more. Thank you so much for listening to us, and enjoy the rest of our topic.